This is Reverse Engineered.
Hey everyone, my name is Jon Penland, and Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta, a premium managed hosting provider. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Emeric Ernoult, founder and CEO of Agorapulse. Emeric, welcome to Reverse Engineered.
Thank you, John. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're really thrilled that you're here with us today. So to get us started, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Oh, of course. So to make it short, because I've been in this entrepreneurship world for more than 20 years,
Mm.
I'm a business lawyer by trade. So I studied law and passed the bar a long time ago in Paris, and worked in the US for a while as well. I did that for 4 years. Then I realized that I was made for something else. And I started my first business with my co-founder, Ben, who is our CTO today. And that was in July of 2000, so 22 years ago. I like to say that Ben and I have been like operating like a couple for 22 years, which is a very long time to be married with a business partner.
A very long time, that's true.
And yeah, it says something about our willingness to work together. And there's so many stories about founding teams who are not getting along. So I feel very lucky that we've been able to go through that and still be together today. So the first business we started was already Saas, and it was already in the community space. It was named Affinities. And the idea back then was to create a social network where people could stay connected online with their real identity. And in 2000, there was news because all the communities were based on people sharing passions and having nicknames, but not having their screen names, but not having
Interesting.
their real names and sharing their real life relationships online. Facebook came with that idea in 2004, and they've been much more successful than we were with that first venture. We went through 10 years of failures and setbacks, and basically having a very, very small business with making very, very little money, which was a big, big challenge and quite difficult. And in 2012, we launched Agorapulse, our product from today. So 10 years later, 12 years later. And it still was a struggle in the early years. The first 4 years were tough, but we broke even in 2015. So 3.5 years after we started, and almost 4 years after we started. And since then, we've been profitable and we've been growing in a healthy pace. And our team is now, it's a social media management software. And our team is now 140 people in like 19 countries or 18 countries, like a lot of countries and across the world. And we are about $20 million of ARR. And and we have big ambitions and having a lot of fun growing the business.
Awesome. That's like a great overview of your history leading up to today. I do have to ask, so those early days, I was looking at the founding of those first ideas back in 2000, 2001, and I had to Google, like, when was Twitter founded? When was Facebook founded? It is before MySpace, right? Like, you were really looking at social networks before social networks were really even a thing, at least from my perspective, which I should mention, I graduated from high school in 2001. So this is kind of the era in which I'm becoming aware of the internet, really, at that point. So how did you end up in that social network space at a time when social networks weren't really prevalent? How did that idea come about?
That's a great question. I don't think there was a grand vision behind it. I think I had a vision. I had something I wanted to build, and Ben had something he wanted to build. And we tried to connect the two because they were not the same things. And we really wanted to start a company together. So in order to get that company started together, we said, oh, let's take Ben's ID and Emeric's ID and try to create something. And it ended up becoming Affinities. That was basically the evolution of our back and forth of conversations and, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And that's what it ended up being. But I would say to those who are listening and who want to start a business, this is not the right way to start a business. In 2000, that was okay because nobody knew anything about how to start a business on the web. But in 2022, there's no way you should be doing that. It's really not. You should be solving a problem that you've validated with customers. You've done discovery. You've done your homework on validating that there was something worth solving. What we did in 2000 was really, oh, I have a hunch. Let's do this. And that's the best way to fail, which we did fail. So it's telling you something about it. We were too early on the wrong country. France was not the right country to start something like that. That's why Facebook was successful in the US, in Europe, and the world was not. The term social network was not even coined by then. I remember Ben and I having arguments about social network and not disagreeing on whether or not we should be using that term. So it's just to tell you how early we were and too early. And when you start a business, you don't want to be too early. That's a very bad spot to be on.
Yeah, it's really amazing that that's a space that you ended up in. And I was reading a little bit about the history, and it sounds like at one point you actually pivoted that product into more of a SaaS model. Is that right? Was there a
Oh,
time where you kind of took that social media
it,
element and said, well, let's try and make a SaaS play out of it?
Yeah, it was a SaaS play from day one. It was called ASP back then, Application
Mm,
Service Provider, but it was already the same idea. It was something in the browser. It was a piece of software you can use in the browser, and you don't need to download disks or anything like
right,
that.
sure.
That was already. It became SaaS, but it was already that, and we were charging a monthly fee, like I think it was €2 a month or something,
Okay.
for anyone
Okay.
to use our advanced premium features, as we
Mm,
call them back then. What we did then is we became B2B, because the B2C version of the product, was making, I don't know, like $1,000 a month, like it was
yeah.
ridiculously low. And we became B2B, and that allowed us to make a little bit more money. So yeah,
Mm,
that was 2002, I think, the first B2B client that we got with that
yeah.
technology.
Yeah. You alluded to this a little bit. You talked about France being the wrong country and you were just too early. Ultimately, that project didn't pan out. But aside from being too early and France being the wrong country, is there anything else that you think, looking back, we really should have done this differently or that differently, and maybe the project could have been a success?
Yeah, well, how it panned out, I want to give two numbers so the listeners realize how bad it was. So we started this first project in 2001. We started working on it in 2000, but it was released in 2000, early 2001. In 2011, so 10 years
10
later,
years.
that project was generating $140,000 a year of revenue.
Hmm.
Today, I make that kind of money in 3 days.
Right. Yeah.
So it gives you the craziness of, after 10 years I was
Right.
generating revenue that today I can generate in 3 days. On the why it failed, like I said, you don't build a business on a hunch. You build a
Mm,
business on a carefully customer validated or potential customer validated idea. So you have an idea. Usually you have an idea because you're in a job or in a position somewhere and you see something that's broken, or you see something that's broken as a consumer in your day-to-day life, and you feel like, oh, that would be an amazing solution to that problem. And what you do next is you do customer discovery with that. There's a book I wish I had read before that's called the mom test, that
mm,
basically explaining to you how to do customer discovery and how to ask the right questions, because most of us will ask the wrong questions that will give us all the bias back. So everybody was, oh yeah, that's a great idea, yeah, that's a great idea, even though they feel now it's a shitty idea.
right.
So you got to read the mom test, and you have to do the customer discovery and talk to all these people who are potential customers or users of your product to validate that you're not just fooling yourself with what you
Yeah.
think is a great product or a great solution to the world, something the world needs.
Yeah.
But
It is interesting to think back to that time because I do think something was fundamentally different about
oh yeah,
that time, those early 2000s, where I can remember again, I'm coming out of high school in that 2001 era. And I can remember just getting on the internet to figure out what platforms are out there. What have people done with this thing? Nobody does that anymore,
no,
right? Like nobody's out there trying to figure out what new things are out there. But I feel like at that time there was an attitude of, we don't even know what we can do with this thing
mhm,
called the internet. So let's just try something and see what happens.
yeah,
And so I do think there's a fundamental difference between building things on the internet today versus 20 years ago in that
yeah.
way.
There are many fundamental differences between
Sure.
back then and today. You just said is really right. And by the way, most of the businesses that were big in 2002, 3, 4, they don't even exist today anymore. Or they're Yahoo, they became super small compared to others that came
Mm,
after that. There are very few businesses who really nailed it and are still around. Google is one of them, by the way. The other difference is, back then, there was no infrastructure. You had to build everything. You need a server, go buy it, put memory card and memory, motherboard and everything in it, like physical, take it in your car and drive it to the hosting company. Today, you go on AWS and you click a couple of buttons, and here you have 3 servers and you're up and running. There was no payment processing system. There was
mm.
no, advertising. You could use self-serve. There was no Google Analytics. Think about everything you could use today to start a SaaS software. None of that existed back then. You had to build all of that yourself, which makes
Yeah.
things a lot more difficult.
Mm. So how did those early efforts, because you're really in the same industry today,
Mm.
how did those early efforts evolve into what is Agorapulse today? How did that transition work?
I don't think I know. The transition came out of necessity because we were failing. We were not making enough money to have a decent life,
Mm,
financially
sure.
speaking. And that the big motivator, right? When you're suffering, financially speaking, you want to get out of the hole you're in. So you're
Mhm.
definitely always looking, what should I do? What can I do? And what else should I do? And we kept looking at something else, trying something else until we got to the first version of Agorapulse, which, by the way, is completely different than what we have today. Back then, it was apps, promotion, contests, quizzes on Facebook. That's what it was.
Okay.
2002, when it
Wow.
was released. All of that we've removed from the software. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. And it was Facebook only. Today, we have like 6 or soon 7 social networks that are included, and we do the whole 9 yards of social media management, which we absolutely did not do early 2012. So I think the recipe is always be listening to what's going on, looking at your numbers, seeing what doesn't work. Like for apps, contests, and promotions, it was super high churn, like 20% or 15 to 20% per month, which you quickly learn is not sustainable, even in 2012. And you're like, okay, that doesn't work. People are not sticking around. What could we do based on what we have today that people would stick around with? And for the last 2 years, we've been thinking about going up market because our churn was too high, our expansion was too low. So our unit economics were not allowing us
Mm,
to grow at the pace we thought we could grow. So we decided, okay, we got to stop serving the bottom of the market because that market is basically stopping us from growing and getting the
sure.
result we should be getting with our software. They don't see the value, and that's probably the problem. So you always are in the iteration mode. You
Yeah.
never stop thinking, what's the next thing?
Yeah.
What's the next thing I need to change? What the next thing I need to stop? What the next thing I need to start?
Yeah. I do think that's something that's fundamentally different about building an online business versus building perhaps a traditional brick and mortar business like a restaurant, which is that with an online business, if you ever think I've built this thing and now I'm just going to ride this particular product or
Nah,
service or model into the future, you've got maybe a 2-year lifespan, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's not going to last long.
Well, you have a 2-year lifespan of growth. Maybe you can last a little bit longer, but
Yeah.
you definitely have a limited lifespan. If you want to
Yeah.
keep growing, if you want to keep being relevant, then you have to keep iterating and
Yeah.
reinventing yourself.
Yeah. So as you mentioned early on, there was a 10-year period from when you first launched your first entrepreneurial
Hmm.
venture in the social network space. And 10 years later, you're making $140,000 a year revenue
Hmm.
with that company. What kept you in this space? Why didn't you go do something else? What kept you staying in this social media, social network world?
Again, no grand big vision, just the events of life. So when we were doing affinities of the previous thing, so eventually what we ended up doing in the B2B space is building community spaces for brands. And because I was pushing brand communities, I was going to conferences and speaking a lot about, oh, here, look at this brand community that was successful and that one and this one, trying to convince them and evangelize the idea. And one day at the end of one of these talk, a lady came to see me and said, oh, I love what you said about brand communities. Do you do games and contests on Facebook? And I needed cash so bad. I said, yes, of
Right.
course. We've never done any of that, but of course we do. Yeah, easy, easy. What do you need? I'll sell it to you. I went back to the office. I told my co-founder and CTO and the dev we had back then, hey guys, you got to learn this API from Facebook because I have a client who wants something like that, needs that. And they learned it, they built it, and it worked well. And then we started doing second, a third, a fifth, 10th, and we did a lot of those, but bespoke. And then the competition started to grow, and I said, "Oh, that is bad. We're becoming an agency. I don't want to be a service company." And then we saw Wildfire coming out of the US that was doing that, but self-serve on a platform. And my co-founder and I looked at that and said, "Oh, that's what we need to do. That's software. We love that." So we platformized all these contests and promotion into Agorapulse, the first version, and then we released it, and it went well. Well, little story here. I was kind of burned out when we released Agorapulse in 2012, and I told Ben, we've been at it for 12 years. I'm
Yeah.
exhausted. And just so you know, I told you I was a business lawyer back then. And in 2012, I was making like a fourth of what I was making at 27 years old in 2000 when I
Yeah.
left my law firm. So I said, I love minimum wage. It's great, but I'd love to make a little bit more if that was possible. And I told him I'm burned out. We need to get to success with this new venture. And I give myself a year to be at 50K MR. So for 1,000 clients paying us 49 a month, or I quit. It took
Yeah.
us 3 years to get there, not 1 year. So just keep patience. And what I learned back then, the one thing I learned is yes, you have to decide when you give up, or if you give up, or if you keep going. And the one thing I learned that you can use to decide between the two is something Gail Goodman, the founder of Constant Contact, shared in one of her talk, because she also had it hard growing Constant Contact, which is an email marketing company software. And she said, as long as it goes up and to the right, you're onto something. Keep doing, keep growing, and keep at it. If you're not going up and to the right, there's probably a reason for that, and you should probably give up. So when I looked at Agorapulse in the early years, even after 1 year we were far from 50 kmr, it was going up and to the right. Every single month was a little bit more, 500 more MR, like something. And I thought, okay, it's going up and to the right. I'm gonna keep going. And it's iterating every time you see, okay, it's going up and to the right, but the churn is still 15%. It's not sustainable. What do I do? And then, okay, they want Twitter. Let's add Twitter. Okay, they want more. Those contests and promotion are not a good idea. Let's pivot slowly to full social media management. So it really was always having the hunger for winning. You got to be hungry
Mm,
for. You got to be willing to win. If you're not willing to win, if you don't want to be successful, then it's so freaking hard that you're
yeah.
going to give up because you're sane. Like Steve Jobs said, people are sane, they give up. It's too
Yeah.
hard. And then you have to constantly analyze and don't ignore your problems. Look at them in the eyes and say, okay, you're my problem. I'm going to fix you. Like, what are you? Like high churn, no expansion, acquisition is too hard. Lower end of the market is not seeing value. They don't want to pay the price. We're spending millions in building this thing and they don't want to pay more than $20 a month. There's something that doesn't work. So you always have to be very aware of all these things and keep iterating on them.
Yeah, as I've been thinking about your story, listening to your story, that line, being hungry to win, yeah, I feel like it's a little bit of an answer to this question that I keep having, which is why is this guy who was a fairly successful lawyer in his 20s, right, still sticking around after 10 years trying to build a SaaS model or a software product and making, minimum wage at that point. And I think that hungry to win piece is the key there. You said you have to be hungry to win or you'll quit. How do you keep winning? How do you keep the idea of winning in front of yourself? Does that make sense? How do you keep that target out in front of yourself so that, yes, I'm winning, right? Because I don't think everybody would instinctively say, I set the goal of, 1,000 customers paying us $49 a month and it had to happen in a year. And it took 3 and I still didn't quit during that time period, right? I think a lot of people after 1 year would have said, all right, we didn't do it. I'm done. So how do you, I guess, define winning in your own mind that keeps you coming back,
Yeah.
chasing that?
Well, first of all, I look at alternatives. What are my alternatives? If I decide I didn't win enough, so I'm going to quit and do something else, what's the something else? And then I look at the something else and I think, I'm not super excited about the something else. Okay, so I know I didn't reach my objective, but let's keep at it for another year or something, because the alternative is I go work for someone else doing, I'm not sure what, and that doesn't feel like an exciting opportunity for me. Maybe I was wrong, but that's the way I looked at it. So I always look at what else is there for me in the world to do rather than this. And as long as I didn't see something amazing that was attractive to me, then I said, okay, well, I'm probably better trying to keep making that work instead of trying to go work for someone else. And then there's starting another business. And when you have no money, and no potential new project that you're excited about and no potential new co-founder, it's really, really hard to start a new business out of the failed business. So you really say, I'd probably better double down on this thing and try to make this thing work, because there's already something, there's already a team, there's already a bunch of clients, there's already, then go and build. So it's basically being an employee in a company or staying at it most of the time. And if you still believe there's a remote possibility of you being successful with that current business, that will always win versus going to work for someone else.
Yeah.
Because if you're an entrepreneur at core, you have the independence in your brain, like it's wired in here. It's not that I've never liked working with other people. I've worked with people in my law firm, and one of them who became my best friend, who was an amazing, amazing boss. I didn't have any problem working for someone, but once you have this vision that I want to create something of my own, I want to have the pride of looking at what I built. I say, I was part of building this. That's amazing. Once you have that, it's quite hard to go do it for someone else.
Yeah, sure. I want to shift gears a little bit and look at Agorapulse, your current business. I'm struck that you operate in a very competitive space. You have competitors, right? You have well-established competitors.
Yeah.
How does Agorapulse go about differentiating or standing out in a really competitive space?
Yeah. So first of all, great question. Second, I don't know in 2022 in SaaS who is not operating in a highly competitive space. So I think you'd better get ready to be in a competitive space and think about how you can make it work rather than trying to find a space where there's no competition because
Mm,
there are so few of them. The way I go at it is pretty simple. And I think that's why we eventually succeeded is when you look at the biggest thinker in strategy for me is Michael Porter. And when you read Michael Porter, the one thing you learn, if I have to summarize Michael Porter's thinking process, thought process in one sentence, I'd say if
mm,
you want to win, you have to be unique. You don't have to be the best. If you're trying to be the best, you're screwed.
mm.
Because at the end of the day, you will end up in a price war between you and the others who also try to be the best at the same thing you do and you guys all do. So it's you got to find a way that makes you unique to a vertical, unique
Mm.
to, because of something your product has and maybe it's protected or patented or unique in some way for a specific persona or a specific type of customer that is going to see you and say, oh, wow, I love that. It's done for me and nobody else does that. So
Yeah.
in the early days, what we did that was unique, well, in the very early days, what we did that was unique is we took those contests and promotions we built on Facebook for $20,000 and put them for $99 a month or even $49 a month in a self-serve product. And then everybody started to do the same thing. The second thing we did that was unique in 2013 is we invented the social media inbox at a time where everybody was like TweetDeck or Hootsuite, call in with messy, a lot of chaotic presentation of the social media content. We said, we basically thought, why don't we present that as an email inbox? Like everybody knows how an email inbox works. It's chronological and everything is in the same thread. So we did that. Sprout and Hootsuite copied us 2 years and 6 years later. And then it was not unique anymore. And what we've done now that makes us unique is we have built an ROI engine to our software that's basically telling you how much revenue and how many leads and prospects and website visits you generate through your work on social media. So we've built an entire engine that helps you see the business impact of what you do on social media. And that's something that we're the first software to do. So
Yeah.
and so this one, I don't want them to copy me as fast as they copied the past one. So I'm patenting, it's being patented right now. And by the way, that's a piece of advice. If there is a level of protection you can get from something really smart that you're doing, think about it because why
Mm.
not? But maybe the patent won't work and whatever. And that will
Sure.
make us unique for 2 or 3 years and they will copy us. And then we'll have to find another. So it's always that quest that you need to have in mind. Because if you end up competing for the best, well, maybe you raise hundreds of millions, but there's going to be one player in your industry who's going to do that, and that's it. So maybe it's you and good for you, but
Yeah.
probably it's not, and then you'll be in a bad spot. So
Yeah.
try to be the one thing that is amazingly tailored for that persona in that market, for that feature, for that need. That will make you win.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. The thing that strikes me is that if you try to be the best, you are going to constantly be in this comparison battle
Oh yeah.
where its selling proposition is always going to be,
Mm,
we're better than option B, and
mm,
here's why. We're better than option C, and here's why. Whereas if you have something unique, it's not so much about the comparison as saying, we're going to help you solve a problem that nobody else really helps you solve in the
mhm,
same way.
mm.
And so you kind of are able to get out of that continuous comparison
Yeah.
loop in the sales process.
Yeah. So if people come to us and say, well, how different are you? We're going to say, oh, we're as good as the big players around. We do a couple things that they don't do. They do a couple of things that we don't do. At the end of the day, do your audit to make sure what you really need is in the feature list on their side and our side. But there's that one thing that we do and they don't. And if that matters to you, then we're definitely the best solution. And that's a much easier way to position yourself than to, oh, we're better at this. We do multi-photo on Snapchat. Yeah, I don't care. We we do mobile publishing on TikTok. Who knows? And then you end up in a feature list that most people don't care about. And it's a really, really hard sell. And also, when you think about outbound, if you want to start doing outbound sales, think about trying to do outbound to sell something that looks like everything else with no differentiator whatsoever and think about doing outbound to a specific persona in a specific industry with a specific job title that are in love with that value proposition, and think about the response rate you get in case number one and case number two, and that's night and day. So if you want
Yeah.
to start growing and go reach your market and sell to them in a more proactive way, you got to have this unique value prop.
Yeah, that sounds super clarifying for sales and marketing teams. Right now, suddenly you don't have 7 personas to go after, or
Mm-hmm.
you're not trying to go after the entire space. And you will actually attract some of those
Yeah,
other
and that's
users who
okay.
are not. Yeah, and that's awesome. That's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. But it gives a lot of clarity to your sales and marketing and to your product teams, right? Like this is who we're serving very specifically. That's awesome. Another thing that I'm struck about in the space that you operate in right now is that there's a lot of challenges coming out of data privacy legislation. There's been a lot of new data privacy legislation over the last, let's say, 5 years, GDPR being the one that everybody knows about, but there are others, CCPA, and there's legislation in Canada and other places. So as you think about a company that's operating in the social media space, what sort of challenges do you think data privacy laws will create for Agorapulse or just for the social media industry in general as you look out over the next couple of years?
Yeah, for Agorapulse, not much because we're the mirror of what's happening on social networks. So what I keep telling our clients is if you're worried about data privacy and Facebook, talk to Facebook. I'm just
Yeah.
mirroring what they do. And I don't even host most of, we're just using their API to display the content, but we keep almost nothing. That's personal. Like, we don't have any email on those Facebook users or
Hmm.
those Twitter users. For Instagram, we don't even have the name of the user. So what we have is so basic that there's no privacy issue with that. The only privacy issue we have to deal with is the data of our clients, their name and their emails. But we don't collect anything medical, gender, or anything like that. So the level of protection that the data we gather needs is like minimal. Like I
Yeah.
don't care if my first name and last name is, and it's probably
Right.
on every SDR database in the world anyway. So is my phone number and my
Mhm.
personal email. For social network, yeah, there are challenges, but I mean, those social networks are so big and so into everyone's lives that they'll have to find a way with the regulators. I don't see a regulator coming in and say, oh, okay, we're going to shut down YouTube because it's like people are going to be in the streets.
Yeah,
Something like
sure.
that. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I think the regulators have done a lot of mistakes. When you look at GDPR, it's really not a good law. It has basically had the opposite effect that it was
Mm.
supposed to have. Instead of protecting you and I, it's protecting Google. That's what it does. Because right now, and Facebook, because right now, as we're connected to them all day long, as we browse the web on Chrome and as we have Facebook open and so on and so forth, they are able, and nobody else but them have that privilege because we don't connect all day long on these other services.
Hmm.
So now Google owns everything and knows everything, and everybody else knows nothing. And
Yeah.
it has created a very unfair market where you can't ask Google to not have you connected, because then if that's the case, you can't use Google anymore. And you and
Yeah.
I, we want to use Google, don't we? So we're
Mm.
going to say, no, no, no. I keep my connection to Google on all the time because I have my Gmail, I have my
Yeah.
calendar, I have my Drive, I have all my stuff in there. I can't not be connected on Chrome. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, by doing what they did, the European legislators, they just made Google like the biggest company owning all the data of the world in the world.
Interesting.
I think that was a mistake. They
Hmm.
should have done it differently. They killed businesses like Criteo, the French retargeting company, or they didn't kill them, but they killed the business that they used to have. And so they killed independent businesses and they made the big ones, the Google, Facebook, and Amazon and Apple, the basically monopolies in what they do,
Yeah.
which I think was not the intention of the
Sure.
legislator when they did that.
Sure. That's a really interesting perspective. I think that's the first time I've heard somebody explain that perspective. And I just want to echo back what I think I heard to make sure I
Sure.
understood kind of what you're suggesting there. So the idea here is that Google, Facebook, they're such a core part of fundamental use of the internet, right? Like if you have a Google account, you're probably using it to sign into 20 or 30 different services. So when all of a sudden Google pops up a thing that says, hey, to continue using our services, you need to opt into all this stuff. And it needs to include, right, clear consent to transfer my data anywhere in the world and the standard contractual clauses and whatever else we say, you're going to just accept it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to have those services. Opting out is not a realistic option for you. And the same could be said for Facebook and some other perhaps media. Well, those are probably the big two.
Yeah.
And so the idea here is that if you want to compete with Facebook, if you want to set up a new social media platform, nobody's going to accept those same terms or those same structural choices that you are going to have to accept to use Facebook. And so where Facebook and Google were already so entrenched that everybody, the average person was just like, sure, that's fine. A new company or a less established company just doesn't have the same penetration across the entire internet ecosystem to make the same choices. Is that a fair assessment
Yeah,
of what you suggesting?
that's exactly the assessment. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that stated quite that way, because you do hear about news about Facebook getting fined for this or Google getting fined for that. And they're not tremendous fines, but you do hear that is where the legislative or the regulation action is happening.
Yeah, they get some fines, but at the end of the day, if threatened to just leave a region because it's becoming too complex and too expensive, think about if Google is saying tomorrow we're going to leave Europe, we're not going to be available in Italy, Spain, France, the UK, like Netherlands, the North.
Mhm.
Wow, I can't even think about that. It's unbelievable as a possibility, and I think the legislator know that. They're probably all using Google themselves. So
Right.
at the end of the day,
Right.
it's
That's
like,
true.
oh my
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
I've created a
Yeah.
monster. Why did I do that?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I want to ask about, something you've mentioned on social media and at some other interviews that I read, is you've talked about fitness or being active as
Mhm.
being an important part of your life as an entrepreneur. And I don't hear that a lot from other entrepreneurs and founders. So can you speak a bit to what role fitness or being active has played in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, when you feel really, really shitty, going to exercise for an hour makes you feel a lot better. I think there is a chemical plant inside our body that creates that our body needs to create to feel better when we exercise. And I remember the worst times in my life going to the gym with, I'm going to quit, I'm never going to make it, it's going to be horrible. And getting out of the gym and feeling like, okay, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to crush that. And so I think there's a chemical element that we need in our body that
Mm,
exercising will release, and sometimes we need those chemicals. We need that boost of something that makes us feel like we can make it, rather than that boost of something that makes us feel like we're depressed and it's not going to work. So yeah, it,
yeah.
it did help with that a lot. And for some reason, I have an image of myself and my body when I look at myself and I have 6 more kilos than I should. I don't like myself. I
Yeah.
gotta work on it. It's me and myself. Like I have no judgment on anybody about how they look and how they see their body, but I know with mine that there are things I tolerate and things I don't tolerate. And so when
Mm.
I get to that point, I just work it out because I want to like the way I look as much as I can. So
Yeah. I've definitely had the same experience of something chemical happens when you exercise,
hmm
especially exercise regularly. I like to
mm.
run, and I was actually just talking to a couple of other folks at Kinsta, and they were asking, "Do you ever experience a runner's high?" And I was like, I don't really think so. I wouldn't describe
Oh
what I
yeah,
experience as a runner's high.
you definitely do.
Well, but what I was going to say is like, what I told them is like, when I finish running, I feel good. I feel happy. Right. And it really doesn't matter like what kind of stressors have been going on in my life. I start my run and I'm really stressed. I finished my run. Those things are still present.
hmm
And it's not that I don't care. And it's not that they're no longer stressors, but my emotional reaction to them has shifted from being one of a sense of overwhelm to a sense of, I can
Control.
endure this. I
Yeah.
can work through this.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it changed your perspective on the problem.
Yeah.
And it is a chemical thing
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah.
The human body is amazingly well engineered to deal with that.
Yeah. And it actually doesn't have to be super strenuous exercise. Like
Oh
I
no.
think that's something that some people, well, I'm not in good enough shape to run, right? I'm not in good enough shape to whatever. A 30-minute brisk walk will do it, right? Like,
Let me tell you what I do, and it is nothing extreme, nothing even close to what you do. I walk with an incline, with a
yeah,
15% incline. And trust me, you walk for 40 minutes, 45 minutes with a 15% incline, you're in sweat and you've had a good exercise.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think people, as a runner, I know what a 15% incline is. That's a serious
Mm.
incline. Like once you get above 12 or 13%, you're not running anymore. You're hiking.
Yeah.
So,
And you can buy a treadmill, a walking treadmill
yeah,
on Amazon for $300 and do that
yeah,
at home. Like there's really, if you want to do that, there's no excuse. It's cheap, it's affordable. You can put it
yeah.
under your desk. If you I have a stand-up desk, and that's how I got started. Now I go to the gym because it's easier and I do it more. But it's anybody can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely two votes coming out of this conversation for exercising in some fashion on a really regular basis. It's not just about health. It really does help with your mind as well.
Mm.
Absolutely. So as we come to a close in our conversation, I have two wrap-up questions for you. So the first is, what is one resource you would recommend to our listeners? It could be a book, a conference, a newsletter, anything what's something that has added value to your life that you would recommend that our listeners check out?
So I'm going to talk books, and I'm sorry I'm going to share more than one book. I read 2 books every month. So that gives you an idea of how many books I have in my bookshelf. So I already mentioned the MOM test to do customer discovery right. I loved, and credit to my co-founder for that, I loved the latest book from Reed Hastings, No Rules Rules, from the founder of Netflix. It's so inspiring on how you build an amazing company with amazing talents. I absolutely love Radical Candor from Kim Scott. You're being candid with your boss, your manager, your leader, or your direct reports, and how you do it right, being human and staying true to your core values. And among the latest book I've read, Amp It Up for CEOs, amazing book from the CEO of Snowflakes. I love Work Rules. That's one of the books I'm reading right now. Great CEO Within, if you want to be a CEO. It's an amazing book, not very well known, but it's like the handbook of being a CEO. If you are learning go-to-market, and yeah, I'm going to stop there because I could show you books again and again and again, but I love reading books. Sometimes, some evenings I go to bed and I feel, okay, do I watch Netflix or do I read 30 pages of my latest book? And Netflix wins 50% of the time, but the book wins 50% of the time.
Very nice. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Reading goes through phases in my life. My youngest daughter was born just over a year ago, and leading up to that, I was reading a book or two every month, and I have not read a book since.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, it will come back, and we'll make sure and get all the ones that you mentioned into the show notes so folks can check those out. So the last question for you today, where can folks learn more about you or about Agorapulse?
The one network I'm trying to be active on is LinkedIn. I gave up on everything else, so they can connect with me on LinkedIn. And just, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, just mention where you're coming from, because I get 10, 15 requests per day, and I don't engage with most of them because otherwise I would spend my days doing that. And obviously, learning more about Agorapulse, you go to agorapulse.com, and that's probably the best place to learn more about the software.
All right, Emeric. So look Emeric up on LinkedIn, mention that you listened to his episode on Reverse Engineered. He'll accept that connection request. Emeric, thank you so much for hanging out with me for a little bit today on Reverse Engineered.
It was very fun, John. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. And thank you to our listeners. That's all for today's podcast. You can access the episode show notes at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Reverse Engineered and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform you're listening on right now. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Reverse Engineered, the podcast on all things business and tech. Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta. Kinsta's premium WordPress hosting can speed up your website by up to 200%. And you'll get 24/7 support from our expert WordPress engineers. Let us show you the Kinsta difference at kinsta.com.